Museum is a place where time does not matter. Looking at the artifacts, we are experiencing the most vivid and exciting moments of history. The program Secrets of Museums on Kazakh TV channel. Before the first museums were opened in Kazakhstan, there were exhibitions of applied art of the steppe peoples. They were held in the 18th century in St. Petersburg. Their expositions were replenished due to the expeditions of outstanding travelers of that time. One of the expeditions was the mission of the German researcher, the author of many scientific articles. It was cold autumn. Strong steppe wind knocked down. A traveler entered the Kazakh yurt. He seemed to have come from distant places. Perhaps if the weather was fine, he would not have stopped in the village where there wasn't the Khan's yurt. It was the village of artisans. But not this time. Cold and hunger made him stop in this village. The traveler looked around in disbelief. He experienced all the hardships of a long journey and knew that any meeting in the steppe could turn out to be the most unexpected. The traveler was Peter Simon Pallas, the German scientist and encyclopedist. He became famous for his scientific expeditions across Russia and Central Asia in the second half of the 18th century and made an invaluable contribution to the development of many fields of science. Peter Pallas was born in Berlin in 1741. At the age of 19, he received a doctorate in medicine. And at the age of 25, the Petersburg Academy of Sciences chose Pallas as the professor of natural history. The Russian Empress Catherine II offered Pallas to serve for the glory of Russia, and he could not refuse. He was sent to study the Caspian region's lands, paying special attention to the mineral wealth and crafts of local peoples. Early frosts made this journey very difficult. The scientist and his group experienced all the hardships of the route, hunger, and disease. It was the second year of the expedition. Bad weather forced the professor to stay in the dwelling of poor artisans. In the morning, he began to inspect the yurt. It was neat and clean. A woman worked in the dwelling. He was very curious about this woman's housework. The German felt the pungent smell of chemical preparations. From the university, he knew how sulfur and saltpeter smelt, but where from did the woman take such chemicals in the steppe? And what was she doing, he thought. At first, Pallas decided that she was a shaman or an alchemist. But he did not have such information that the Kazakhs used to make potions or tried to make gold with the help of a philosopher's stone. All this was a hobby of superstitious Europe. The woman skillfully rubbed the crystals into powder, spooned it in the bowls, and mixed in different proportions. The finished mixtures had bright colors and they seemed tasty. The hostess took off a bunch of dried plants from the wall and cut it into small pieces. It seems like shamanism, Pallas thought. I would not be surprised if she will get the snake's head and start pounding it in mortar. The woman began to throw all these strange ingredients into the cauldron. The boiling liquid turned dark and smelled terribly. The German traveler felt dizzy. And only now, Pallas saw that the woman dipped woolen threads into the dark water. He looked around the dwelling and noticed that there was already dried yarn of different shades on the floor. That's it. So the yarn is dyed here, the traveler concluded with relief. The researcher became interested in watching the process of dye's preparation, but he decided to live in the yurt for several days in order to better examine everything, write down, and also find out where the locals found minerals that are used for preparation of the dye. At first, the woman looked at Pallas with suspicion, but then apparently she realized that his curiosity is strong enough and let him participate in the process. It was even said that the German researcher helped the woman to grind the crystals and mix the solution. They expressed words in sign language, and as the scientists subsequently wrote, they did not feel any barriers to communicate. Peter Pallas described in his works the textile craft of the Kazakhs. They make dyes from herbs and chemical minerals found in the local places. The main plant is the madder and its roots. People obtain yellow, brown, orange, red, burgundy, purple, and crimson colors from it. It all depends on how to mix the solution and what chemical components should be added. The artisans prepare the dye on the basis of mutton fat so that it is long-lasting. Then the leather and wool do not lose color. Artisans apply saltpeter, vitriol, sulfur, ammonia, and ochre. A lot of minerals can be found in the steppe rocks of the saltpeter lands. Natural ammonia is located in Turkestan mountains, and combustible sulfur lies along the rivers. The steppe dwellers give special preference to white paint, considering that this color of dye expresses happiness. The masters use white clay and chalk to strengthen white tone of felt carpets, which are laid in the dwellings. The Kazakh women process wool. They are involved in weaving, sewing, and embroidery. They make the headwear from thin fabric for young women. This is a very laborious work. High hats are decorated with pearls, silver, and expensive stones. Returning to St. Petersburg, Peter Pallas made another remark. The steppe people do not have convenient workshops for the craft, but everything they make with hands is either very special or endurable. For domestic use, they do not need any foreign products, and all the needs of life are obtained from the products of own cattle breeding. Almost 400 years, Pallas's books were reference works for the Russian geologists. The explorer was himself a walking encyclopedia because he had an impressive knowledge of facts. There is no branch of the natural sciences where this genius would not bring innovation in. The program Secrets of Museums on Kazakh TV channel. All that was brought from the Kazakh steppes by the European researchers was taken to exhibitions of applied art. They have been held before the museums were opened in the Kazakh steppe. But the real museum activities started in this region from the armory room of Zhangir Khan, the first Kazakh educated ruler. He was born in 1801 and was the last Khan of the Bukhay horde. Zhangir Khan was fond of science, and enlightenment was the meaning of his life. The Bukhay horde in the early 19th century was located in the lowest reaches of the Ural and the Volga rivers. Zhangir Khan's father wanted to bring his son up as an educated person and, given him an elementary education, sent Zhangir to Astrakhan governor for further education. The young ruler received an excellent education. He spoke Russian, Persian, and Arabic. Zhangir was the first Kazakh Khan to have understood that it was impossible to protect the interests of the people without attaching them to knowledge. Despite the Khan's adherence to native customs, it did not prevent him from communicating with outstanding contemporaries, scientific and cultural figures. He was highly esteemed by the explorer Humboldt and botanist Karl Klaus, the chemist Bergman, the professor of the University of Tartu Gebel, the Colonel Raevsky, the ethnographer Karelin, and also by the linguist and the author of the explanatory dictionary Vladimir Dal. In 1826, Zhangir Khan was invited to the coronation of the Russian Tsar Nicholas I. He tried to remember everything that he saw in Moscow. After visiting the Kremlin Dormition Cathedral, the Khan was invited to the armory room. The Kazakh ruler was amazed by the arms collection. Ancient weapons, swords, sabers, and rifles, awards, military insignia, and royal armor, everything represented the majesty of the empire and the crown. Zhangir Khan decided at all costs to open an armory room at his headquarters, and later he managed to do it. He collected a worthy collection of weapons. Some of them were presented by rich relatives and some were delivered from long trips. On his way back from Moscow, Zhangir Khan also visited Kazan. He especially wished to visit the Kazan University, which in the 19th century was one of the foundations of the Russian science. There, the ruler met and subsequently made friends with the professor Karl Fuchs, who then wrote about his meeting in one of his articles. Doctor, botanist, ethnographer, historian, archaeologist, and numismatist Karl Fuchs was born in 1776 in Germany. After graduating from the University of Marburg and defending his dissertation at the age of 24, he went to the Russian Empire, where, for special merits and research work, he was appointed as the professor and then rector of the newly created Kazan Imperial University. Karl Fuchs made a huge contribution to the Russian science and the whole generation of young scientists. Fuchs respected Zhangir Khan. Before, he heard about the Kazakh ruler's education and good manners. He showed the audience the laboratory and the library of the university to the Khan, and all this time they had a casual conversation. During this conversation, Zhangir Khan drew attention to chess, which stood on the scientist's desk. "Are you fond of?" Fuchs asked. "I saw them, but I never tried to play," the Khan replied. "It's easy to learn. I'll show you how the figures move, and in a short time you will master the game," the professor continued. Fuchs began explaining the essence of the chess moves to the Khan, and also told that this game came from the East. Gradually, Fuchs began to talk about mathematics. He explained how simple calculations can help people in navigation, construction, and many useful things. The Khan listened attentively. "You know, there's a tricky puzzle, also related to calculations. If you would like, I can tell it," said the professor. It begins with a parable. An ancient Indian mathematician, after creating chess, brought him to his ruler. The ruler liked the game so much that he allowed the inventor to choose his own reward. The wise man asked the king 1 grain of the first grid of the chessboard, 2 grains of the second, 4 for the third. So the number of grains should have been doubled for each grid of the chessboard. The ruler, who did not understand mathematics, quickly agreed. He even was surprised that the inventor of such a useful game asked for such a low fee. The ruler ordered the treasurer to count and give the mathematician a bag of grain. However, a week passed, and the treasurer still could not calculate how much grain was needed. The ruler was angry. What is the reason for the delay? Is it so difficult to multiply in 2 the number of grains for each new grid? The ruler thought. But the treasurer showed him the calculations and said that it is impossible to pay off if the oceans and seas on the planet are drained and the wheat is sown across the world. How do you think is that possible? Fuchs asked Zhangir Khan with some sense of dominancy. I do not know what the number will be, but this is really an astronomical sum, Zhangir Khan replied. In the Kazakh steppe, the sellers of horses sometimes play the same tricks with trustful buyers. What is it like? The bewildered professor asked. It's very simple, the Khan replied. A man buys a horse, but he is not happy with the price, for example 100 rubles. Then a seller offers him to pay not for the horse, but for the horseshoe nails. Half palushka coin for the first nail, 2 palushka coins for the second, and a coin for the third nail, and so on. There are 6 nails on each horseshoe. At the end of bargaining, the buyer is forced to pay more than 40,000 rubles. Having finished the story, the Khan laughed, and Fuchs was confused. He hoped to surprise the guest with a mathematical task. Instead, he found himself in an awkward position. It's impossible not to be surprised, the German professor later wrote. Meeting the steppe inhabitant, who was the lord, the man with brilliant education, his judgments reveal that he had not only learned much from the European civilizations, but also multiplied his intelligence. Zhangir Khan, after visiting Kazan University, became interested in the collection of the Arab coins and printed books. The time will come, he said, when the Kazakh people will learn in their own schools. The Khan always kept in contact with the university. In 15 years, he again visited Kazan and presented 6 valuable ancient manuscripts to the library of the educational institution. The scientist of Kazan University highly appreciated the versatile knowledge of Zhangir Khan, as well as his participation in the studies on the Eastern history. They decided to elect him an honorary member of Kazan University. In 1841, Zhangir Khan opened his first school in his headquarters. At the school, children were trained for admission to the Russian educational institutions. Until his death in 1845, the ruler kept the school at his own expense and himself examined the school students. Zhangir Khan also issued a decree obliging the aristocracy to raise funds for the construction of mosques with primary schools. In many cities across Kazakhstan, monuments were opened to the first Kazakh educated ruler, Zhangir Khan. One of them locates in his homeland in Uralsk city. The monument was also erected to the rector of Kazan University, Professor Karl Fuchs, in Kazan. The city street and the park were also given his name. Thanks to Zhangir Khan, the ruler of the Bukit Horde, the first school of the European model, the first archival service, the first treasury, a pharmacy, a hospital, a post office, And of course, the first museum were opened in Kazakhstan.